Hi everyone, welcome to the MBA Boston Data Podcast. Today I'm joined by Sean Harkin, Data Science and Lead at Lloyds Banking Group. Today we're going to talk about locking real value from AI insurance. To go back to Sean's got a PhD in statistics, 18 years experience in financial services, within data across startups, banks and consultancies. At present, he's putting GenAI and agentic solutions into production, overcoming the POC bottleneck that affects many firms. And he also leads a team of excellent data scientists, ML engineers, and other professionals at Lloyds. As we discussed, we're really going to focus on AI for medical documentation, analytics, and decision recommendation, and the challenges of implementation within AI to production. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Josh. Great to be here.
Sean, before we go into the topic of today, would it be possible to give just a quick, brief outline of your experience today, how you got into data science and AI specifically, kind of your career today?
Yeah, certainly, Josh. So like a lot of data scientists, I come from a research science background. So my undergrad and my master's were in the area of biochemistry, biophysics, then found out that investment banks like to hire people who are able to build statistical models and analyze data. So spent a number of years as a risk modeler in the banking sector. While I was doing that, spent some time in kind of more risk management roles as well, which was useful later on in terms of understanding what is it that my risk colleagues are concerned about. But very quickly pivoted back to modeling in the early part of the 2010s, moved more into machine learning, data science, AI. Did a PhD in applied statistical modeling, so really looking at causal inference and those techniques. And more recently have led data science and AI teams at a range of organizations, consultancies, startups, and larger organizations like Lloyds. What I've done in my two most recent roles is basically to create and then lead a data science team. So I've done that twice now. I've done that in the context of a fintech startup and more recently in the insurance arm of Lloyds Bank. Still try to do a little bit of hands-on work myself, but nowadays life is largely about delivering through others rather than doing any hands-on modeling myself.
In terms of challenges, for instance, this is going to come with a variety, we'll get into it, but what are the biggest challenges have you saw or your team saw ensuring critical accuracy and reliability when using AI for medical documentation for interpretation?
The big one probably won't surprise anyone. It was controlling the hallucination problem in this context. If you simply provided the document to the LLM and asked it to write a summary of that page, it would make things up, right? It is widely known with LLMs that if you don't have a very careful prompt, you will get hallucination. It would make up facts that were not true, and it would miss things that were important. In order to mitigate that risk, we constructed it all around the ontology that I talked about. The ontology is quite simple. It's basically a knowledge graph. So it defines the key entities that we're looking at, the patient, disease conditions, medication, tests that have been performed, and so on, and different attributes of each of those. And it essentially tells the LLM what it's looking for in the underlying document. And we have very careful definitions, dictionaries, and so on that we provide as well. And essentially all of that goes in the prompt. So the ontology, the definitions associated with it, some examples, etc., all become part of quite a heavily engineered prompt that basically constrains the LLM. So it can't ad lib. It is looking for those facts and those facts only from the underlying document. We get it to provide citations as well. So for every fact that it extracts, we get it to extract a citation. So basically a snippet of text or multiple snippets of text that show where that information was based on in the underlying document. And then we have separate LLM agents distinct from the one that did the extraction to basically act as a judge. So basically to look at the citation, to look at the fact that was extracted and say, does the citation support the fact or not? So it's one of the layers of testing is multi-agent LLM as a judge. We do have other human-based testing as well, but that's something that is kind of built in to the workflow to make it safe. And that's essentially why the project took some time to get this to the point where we had iterated and refined the prompt many times. Was necessary to get to the point where we felt this was as accurate as a human doing it and therefore good to use with our customers.
How do you balance automation with the human in the loop review, specifically within a kind of underwriting or approval process? Because that's where things can pull down slightly. And a human, I would say, probably does need to be required at that point. So what's the balance?
Yep, absolutely. And these tools and other AI and ML solutions that we're building for our life insurance business, they are purely intended as assistants, so decision support tools for human decision makers. So this is still fully a human in the loop process. There's no intention to take the human out of that process. These tools are purely there to ensure, first of all, time saving, but also to ensure consistency and reliability in the facts that the humans are relying on. But ultimately, what this is doing is taking the underlying document and it is converting it into a very high quality, very concise, structured summary that is then given to a human decision maker. And as it happens, the underwriters, so the human decision makers who do this, are very happy with this solution. So like to them, this is basically removing the painful part of their job, so crawling through lots of documentation to extract the facts. And it is allowing them to focus on the high quality part of their job. So thinking about the case, making the decision, and spending their time on the edge cases that are a bit weird or unusual in some way, rather than just trawling through documents on relatively routine cases.
Yeah, I think I've had issues there. I'm probably just giving you a litany of problems I've had from like analog cases and stuff. But yeah, when it comes down to sometimes human approval, there can be room for interpretation. I think AI can really help guide and basically align a decision in a more objective capacity. So that's good to hear. My next question would be around domain-specific models versus sort of general purpose models. So what roles do domain-specific models play in LLMs in medical document analysis?
Excellent question. And there's a couple of different ways that we could attack this problem, right? Because ultimately, what we need the solution here to have is a lot of contextual medical understanding of what is being extracted from these documents. So it's nowhere near as simple as a basic keyword search. So let me give you an example. The fact we might be trying to extract is whether or not a customer has type 2 diabetes, yes or no. There might actually be nowhere in the underlying documentation that says this person has type 2 diabetes. What you might instead have is blood sugar readings. You might have a test that has shown protein in the urine. You might have other test results that are talking about tiredness or fatigue or weight gain. And you might have something else that talks about whether or not they need to be prescribed insulin. So any human expert looking at the totality of those facts would say diabetes, but it might actually never say that in a direct way in the document. So what the model needs to understand is that those facts add up to a highly likely statement that diabetes is yes for this person. There's different ways you can achieve that. So there are now LLMs out there, such as MedGemma, that are specifically fine-tuned on medical corpuses of documentation, and they could be a good choice for something like this. At the time we started this work, so we started this about 2 years ago, those tools weren't quite so mature at that time. So we went down the route of using the Google Gemini models instead, not doing any fine-tuning, and instead relying on prompt engineering to give the models the context that they need. And in this use case, it has turned out that very careful prompt engineering has been highly performant in giving us what we need. So the underlying Gemini models have been trained on a large enough corpus that they actually do have a good grasp of medical concepts, and taking some careful prompt engineering, careful definitions on top of that, and the fact that we're constraining the model to complete a very tightly defined ontology, all of that has been good enough to give us good performance without needing to use a specialized LLM or having to fine-tune. Now, as it happens, I do actually think there is a big future for specialized LLMs and for domain-specific small language models. So I think in other use cases, there are multiple reasons why they're likely to be very beneficial, but they're not what we needed to get us to high performance in this case.
So obviously we discussed the technical element there. Just going to, again, it's all about learning and understanding from my perspective as well to a non-technical audience. My next question would be around how AI decision recommendations can be made more explainable, if that's the correct word, to regulators and internal risk teams? Because I would say there would be data professionals in those teams, obviously, that speak the same language as you, but there's going to be non-technical stakeholders there as well too. So what's your way of approaching that capacity?
Yeah. Josh, so much of what I do in my job is about translation. So, we can have a particular set of machine learning work that we have done or AI solution building that we have done. And depending on whether I'm explaining that to a fellow data scientist or explaining that to a fairly non-technical stakeholder, I will explain the exact same thing in very different words. So let's take a simple example, right? Let's say we're doing some retrieval augmented generation. If I was speaking to a data scientist, I might just say, we vectorized the text and then did vector similarity search to find the most relevant context. And a data scientist would know exactly what I meant. A non-data scientist would be totally lost. If I was saying the same thing to a non-data scientist, what I would say is we took the text, we converted it into a form where it's represented as numbers. We then looked at the underlying information we had and looked for things that were similar in that space of numbers, and we defined that as the relevant context that we need to retrieve. In both of those cases, I have actually said the exact same thing. I've just used different words to describe it, depending on the audience. And it works the other way as well, right? If I'm taking business requirements and explaining them to a highly technical team of engineers, I've got some translation to do there too, to take something out of commercial language and put it into engineering language. So I think that's one element of it, right? While you're doing a project, you need to do a lot of translation of all the language involved to make it work for the different stakeholders involved. In terms of the tool itself, there are also things that you can do to make it explainable for people who are reviewing it from a risk point of view and regulators and other audiences as well. Let's say you're doing an AI solution where you're asking a large language model to recommend a decision for something. You can also get the model to explain the basis for its decision. Why has it made that choice? That's a relatively simple prompt engineering problem. And you can also ask the model to extract and supply the underlying facts that support that decision as well. So let's say you're looking at documentation. Let's say you're recommending a decision based on that documentation. You can prompt the model to say, this is the decision I recommend, and these are the specific facts that I've pulled out of the underlying information that lead me to recommend that decision. I think a lot can be done through that kind of prompt engineering to make stakeholders much more comfortable that the model reasoning is transparent.
Just moving swiftly on to the value adds as well too, because again, like from a stakeholder perspective, I think people always want to see the ROI from AI, and it's not immediate benefit. It was a situation where, probably the last 12 months, everyone just thought you'd flip a switch and then there'd be some sort of immediate benefit. And I think it's now been realized it's a long-term opportunity, and it's going to take a bit of time to the industry to catch up, and that's every industry. So I'm keen to hear your thoughts on that too. But just moving into this space, what have you seen AI deliver in the most tangible way in terms of ROI, specifically within insurance? So we could look at efficiency, customer experience, loss ratio improvement, for instance. Is there any fundamental ROI benefit you've seen from your work so far?
Yeah. Josh, a very interesting question, right? Like, I think over the past 2 years, and in particular in sort of 2024 going into 2025, there was an awful lot of magical thinking around how quickly we would get benefits from this technology. People seem to think that you could take hard problems, provide it to an out-of-the-box LLM with a relatively short prompt, get high-quality answers right away, and be releasing huge value the next week. I think people are now realizing that is just not the case. The hallucination problem is a big deal. In order to get quality responses that are safe and can be depended on out of an LLM, you need either a lot of careful prompt engineering, or you need a very well constructed agentic solution to get it to a level that you're satisfied with. And then you've got the integration problem, right? It quite often requires you to rethink existing business processes in order to integrate well. So I think people are now realizing that in some ways this is no different from a traditional software engineering project. Yes, we have better technology. Yes, it can do things that we couldn't do before. But guess what? To get it doing those things well and safely and reliably and to an extent that risk teams and regulators will approve can require 18 months of an engineering project to get you there. So in some ways, it is not that different from what we had previously on software projects. And I think for it to become really transformational, that will take quite a long time for different sectors to absorb it and for it to really change how those sectors operate. There are some historical examples that people have been talking a lot about in the past couple of years. One that people go back to is the electrification of factories. So there was a lag of up to 40 years between electrical technology being available and it actually transforming manufacturing, because the pre-existing factories that existed were built around the steam engine and the drivetrain that came from that, and people just couldn't rebuild all the factories overnight. So it took decades for it to be absorbed. I think any new technology is similar. You've got to redesign how businesses operate around the tech in order to really release the value. So I think it will take some time. Like the use cases that we are working on for protection, one of the things that we do is very much to look at what is the value statement for this? What will it do for our customers? How will it get a customer a better experience? How will it make things quicker for the customer? And how will it make things more cost effective for Lloyds Banking Group as well? So allow us to do more with the resources that we have already got. And I'm happy to say that I'm obviously not going to share a number, but the use cases that we're working on, we are now releasing tangible value from them. But it took 2 years of hard work to get to that point.
I completely agree with your assessment there as well too. There's examples in every business where the use case for AI is strong, but is it the right time? Is the data right in the first place, which is usually the first question. And then going into, we're not going to go into it just now, but because I think my listeners will be sick and tired of it, but efficacy, governance as well too. Even in our organization, there's some really good initiative and conversations I'm having with third parties where I'm like, yeah, that sounds amazing, but what would the negative impact be?
There is a cost question there as well, right? Some of the agentic architectures that I see people talking about, they may be looking at something where you've got a dozen agents interacting with one another. Multiple of those are LLM agents. In the flow of what it's doing, each LLM agent may be calling the LLM multiple times, maybe even dozens of times. By the time you map it all out, you may have dozens, even hundreds of separate LLM calls and quite a lot of tokens passed over as part of that. So when you look at the cost per token and add it all up, there will be use cases that people will look at and say, actually, this is not that different from the economics of a human being doing it. So, that angle needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah, I think time saving is important, but if it's at the detriment of the user experience or a customer experience, let's say, then there could be an argument against it. But yeah, we're seeing a lot of it now, especially in my field.
And certainly for the bank, that is a big no-no, right? Like it is very much customers come first, and it must be safe for the customer. It must be a good experience for the customer before the bank will even consider using it. And that is absolutely right.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I've got my own opinion on this, but I want to hear yours. On my next question is, what are the differentiators when it comes to successful AI initiatives from pilots or proof of concept that never make it into production in comparison to something that does?
Josh, I think that is the challenge that a lot of organizations get stuck on. I speak to a lot of people in the industry who have had a lot of success at doing POCs, but turning those POCs into a product solution is hard. And in any organization, the kinds of things that people are dealing with is, first of all, some basic engineering things, like getting the right environment set up, like getting the right pipelines to bring data into the project, like having access to the right environments and the right pipelines to provide the output back to internal business users. Also questions around governance, so pre-existing governance processes that were well optimized for other kinds of modeling or other kinds of software in terms of the questions they asked and the things that they looked at, but which just may not be asking all of the right questions for an AI solution, and which it therefore just takes time for the modeling team and the governance teams to get aligned on everything that they need to look at. Pretty much everyone I speak to in the industry talks about those issues, so they are quite universal. For a lot of teams, it is basically a case of good stakeholder relationships. So you need to have a data science and AI team that has a good understanding of the engineering, of the governance, of the data privacy issues, of the regulation, and takes all of those areas very seriously and really engages with the relevant stakeholders internally to make sure that it's done in a way that everyone thinks is high quality and that everyone is proud and happy to actually put into production with their customers. I think at a bigger level, organizations are saying, what do we need to streamline to make it easier to deploy AI solutions? So how do we update governance frameworks? How do we make those governance frameworks more seamlessly integrated so that you don't have multiple separate overlapping frameworks? How do you sort out the engineering challenges so that you've got one well-integrated pipeline with the right toolings and services for pushing things into production? I think none of this will surprise any of the listeners very much. Everyone I speak to in the industry has some version of the same set of challenges. And that's hardly surprising. This kind of comes back to the integration point I was making earlier, where any new technology, in order for it to be really transformational, requires organizations to be redesigned around that technology. And that doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah, completely agree. And I don't think any company can claim that as well too in terms of an overnight success with the use of these types of tools and technologies. We're going to do a bit of MBN bottom data bingo here because we've already mentioned governance within AI, a little bit of efficacy, value, which is a current theme through most of the conversations I have with leaders like yourself, I think specifically within the use case of AI. How do you specifically define and measure value when deploying AI in workflows, for instance, specifically within claims and underwriting context?
Yeah, there isn't just one metric. So any model that we are building may have different goals. It may have different things where it is trying to move the lever in terms of a particular outcome that the bank cares about. One outcome that we care very much about is the customer journey. So some of the things that my team have created will reduce the journey time for certain customers down from as much as 20 days down to 1 day. So now not everyone was waiting that long to begin with, and not everyone will benefit to that full extent. But for some customers, you're looking at a huge reduction in how long it takes to get things done. So that's one metric, right? So just basically speed of customer service. I think another metric that we would care about is the quality of customer service, which would be measured through things like customer feedback, complaints, etc. Do we manage to shift indicators that tells us the average customer is having a better experience? Something else is value, right? Some things that we will do as a bank will basically aim to allow us to do more with the same amount of resource. So we might say for each case that we process, the cost per processing that case has gone down as a consequence of AI. Therefore, we can handle more cases with the amount of resource that we have got as an organization. And that helps with our ambitions to grow the business. I've spoken of multiple metrics there. I couldn't really say that there's one dominant metric. It depends on each particular project, what that model is seeking to achieve. And some of them are aiming to move more than one measure of success.
In regards to challenges of implementing AI into production, I can't we went on it previously. POC to production is something it's a mantra really for me right now when it comes to trying to find AI engineers across the world. Have you got a example of utilizing AI from POC to production? It's easier said than done, and it depends on the company you work for, really. There's a variety of different types of reasons why you might not be able to put something into production when it's completely out of your hands. So with that in mind, because I know you obviously have more than several use cases right now at Lloyds under your team, what's been the biggest operational and organizational barrier to deploying AI systems at scale in a regulated environment like Lloyds?
Very often it's the time that it takes to set things up. So if you are deploying a model in the right way, you're taking care to set up your architecture correctly. So you're doing things like having a dedicated GCP project for that model. You've got the API connections that you need to set up. They are specific to that model as well. And you've got other elements of infrastructure that you need for the model, such as monitoring, value tracking, and so on, that all need to be linked to it. In a highly regulated environment, it is the case quite rightly that any new infrastructure you set up needs to go through a lot of processes, a lot of security checks, etc. So that just takes some time, right? So if you've got a new POC where you've built the model, it's working, you're getting good performance, you're saying, okay, we now want to get this into production, simply to set up all of those elements of infrastructure that you need to connect everything takes some time to get that done. And you've got governance linked to every one of those elements as well. Again, for very good reasons, right? We're a bank. Every customer out there would expect a bank to have very careful security checks in every single thing that it does, and we do, but that means it takes some time. You have governance processes that take time as well. So for anything that we do, there are multiple different control teams that need to be satisfied that the quality is good enough. So there'll be people who look at it from a model risk point of view. There are people who look at it from a data privacy point of view. There are people who look at it from a cybersecurity point of view. If it's in insurance, then it may have to go to external reinsurers as well to get them to sign it off. Each of those sign-offs has a process that takes some time. There may be interdependencies between them. So this party can only sign off when this party has signed something else. You may even have sort of two-way dependencies between different elements of the process. And all of that just takes time. But as a customer of a bank, I'm very happy that all of that is in place. That is how things should be. And the name of the game really is being as efficient as possible in how you work through all of that, but actually being very careful and taking all of the risks very seriously and investing the time that you need to make sure the solution is safe.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Not to discredit other organizations, but if you had a frontier mentality within the banking sector and implemented things rapidly, I don't think you'd have a customer base for a long time or a short time even. I think it'd be a bit disastrous. So there's times and places for ways of thinking. I think the time that your team specifically has implemented these solutions is extremely quick, obviously done in a regulated environment, much more personally than I thought would have happened in the time frame. So it's good to see that organizations like Lloyds are moving at pace, but in a regulated environment as well too, and making sure the checks and balances are there. My biggest fear was large organizations in the banking space and insurance space would potentially miss out, and that's not been the case. So it's really good to see, to be honest with you.
To be honest, right, we are proud of what we've achieved in this setting. It is difficult to get things into production in a highly complex, highly regulated business. There's a huge number of moving pieces to think about. There are people in my team who are incredibly good at all of the attention to detail across all of those pieces. But it has been hard work over many months to get there. So, if I'm honest, we are quite pleased with ourselves that we have managed to cut through all of that and get multiple models into production.
No, definitely. One last question, and again, it's going to come back slightly, but probably it's less about governance, but more about quality. And we did mention it. If you don't have good data, then there's no point really doing anything in terms of implementation of AI. So how do issues, in your opinion, like data quality, model drift, and governance impact long-term success of AI systems into production?
This is something that I discuss with my risk colleagues all the time. I view doing the science well and having proper risk management as the same thing, right? Or they're definitely two faces of the same thing. If I am building a machine learning solution, I want it to be accurate. I want it to be performant. I want to have all of the diagnostic tests that the model needs and to test for things like drift and so on. And I regard those as just part of doing the science, right? But you could equally say that they're all risk management things. They're all about keeping our customers safe. So actually, it's the same thing. Any solution that we build as a team, what I like to do is to say, well, we've got lots of risk frameworks. We need to apply them. We need to think through all of the issues. We also just need to take a step back and think, what are we doing here? What are the risks inherent in what we're doing? Without thinking about any frameworks, just think about what is this doing? What could the potential dangers be? And then make sure to do the science in a way where you mitigate those risks. We spoke about the summarizer at length. The risk there is the hallucination problem, right? Quite simply, the model could make things up or it could miss important clinical facts. That would be unacceptable for our customers. So we had to make sure we built it in a way where that did not happen. And essentially everything about our science and our engineering design are all centered around mitigating that risk. So the whole project, in a way, has risk management right at the heart of it. And I regard that as the same thing as doing quality science. And yeah, as you alluded to, for any organization, getting the house in order in terms of data is a prerequisite for doing any of this well. For the models that we have built, some of them have been more traditional predictive models where we've had to rely on structured data. We have done all of the standard tests around evaluating, is the scale of the data large enough? Can we cleanse any data quality issues? Can we get it into the right shape that you need to build a model on it? For our generative AI solutions, it is document data, so it's essentially documents that come to us as PDFs. And all of the testing that we have done as part of the modeling process basically serves to evaluate whether that data is able to get us the high level of accuracy that we need out the back of it. So again, testing whether the data allows us to do what we want to do with these models is built into every fiber of how we have done these projects.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think that ultimately it is improving the customer experience. I'm a fan, and it's done in a safe and ethical way, and it's making sure that things are just moving at a pace that's regulated, but in an environment that's still moving forward. It's still fast. It's fast enough to keep up as well too. So it's good. And I think ultimately, like I said, if it's making the customer experience, that's the paramount in my opinion, and that's making it an easier environment, then it's got to be a benefit.
And Josh, you alluded to this earlier, right? The comparison between the banking sector and the tech sector. Over the past 7, 8, 9 years, there are lots of practices that the banking sector have adopted from the tech sector. A lot of the technologies, a lot of the tools, a lot of the ML techniques that we use, also things like agile ways of working and so on. So there's an awful lot that banking has adopted from the tech sector. And working for a bank nowadays feels much more like working for a tech company than it would have done a decade ago, for example. But not everything that the tech sector does can be absorbed into banking. At the end of the day, the financial sector, it's where people keep their money, it's where their savings reside, it's essential financial products that people rely on. And the financial sector is at the heart of everything else that happens in the economy. So there are certain things where you just need more control, more governance, more risk management on what you do. But it is possible to do those things in a more streamlined way. And a lot of what the sector is currently looking at is all of those controls that we've got, how can we do it in a very streamlined way without sacrificing safety at any point along the way?
I feel safer already, Sean. Thank you very much for spending the time and talking to me today on this topic. I'm sure our listeners are really interested in what you have to say. If anyone wants to get in touch, what's the best way to get hold of you?
So if any of our listeners want to get in touch, LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I read my LinkedIn messages. So if anyone would like to talk to me about anything we have discussed today, ping me on LinkedIn and reference this podcast and I will pick it up.
Yeah, I can confirm that as well too, because that's how we got in touch, Sean. Yeah. But look, really appreciate your time, mate. Thanks for your time. I'm glad that we got this done. And yeah, hopefully we can get you on again soon.
Josh, I very much enjoyed it and I'd be happy to come back to talk to you again in the future.
Cheers again, Sean. All the best.
Thank you.